This presentation is going to be about freedom of speech in American media. It is Our group is me, uh, London, and Quentin and Valeria. So let's get into it. So first, an overview. Freedom of speech is one of the hottest debated topics among First Amendment rights today, and that's what this presentation is going to be all about. Is kind of the effects of freedom of speech today in today's society, and we'll go over four different sections in this presentation. There's a little overview of each of them: political leaders, social media, protests, and college campuses, which I have here as well. Start with politics and sort of the effects that freedom of speech has had in the political sphere. Then we'll go to social media. Obviously, that's a very highly debated topic right now, um, based on you know social media apps, their owners, guys like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and more. So we'll talk about that and a modern example in there. Then we'll go to protests. There's quite a bit going on right now with protests and in the last few years, and then college campuses, which play a huge role in obviously our lives as college students and professor, but kind of shape the narrative for a lot of people. So.
Okay, so my section is the politics section. And first, I'm going to go over the importance of politics in regards to the First Amendment. So, the First Amendment was born out of political necessity. The founders feared government overreach over speech and press. Political pressure on the press has existed throughout U.S. history, but the First Amendment serves as a legal barrier. Politicians and government agencies can attempt to influence media, but the Constitution limits how far they can go. And when political agendas clash with press freedom, the First Amendment is the primary line of defense. Now, the story I'm going to be going over is Trump and the FCC threatening broadcast license revocations over news coverage. So basically, in March 2026, President Trump and FCC Chair Brendan Carr threatened to revoke broadcast licenses over what they claimed were incorrect news items following a Trump social media post claiming news damage reports were deliberately distorted. The impact is if the FCC were to follow through, it would mark the first time in modern history that the government revoked a broadcast license over news content it disagreed with. It could deter reporters from covering the administration critically and set a precedent that reshapes how broadcast journalism operates under government oversight. Now, legal experts pointed to the Supreme Court's unanimous 2024 ruling in NRA versus Volo, which held that a government entity's threat of legal sanctions against a third party to suppress disfavored speech violates the First Amendment. Also, that government officials cannot attempt to coerce private parties in order to punish or suppress views that the government disfavors. A broadcast producer or station manager at a local affiliate who can speak to the effect these license threats have on a day-to-day editorial decisions. There could be human interest in a First Amendment or media law attorney who can explain whether the FCC legally has grounds to revoke a license over news content and such else. Now, the good side of the politics in this story, so there is accountability for misinformation, where proponents argue that broadcast licenses already have a legal obligation under the FCC's public interest standard, and that threatening license review is simply a reminder that broadcasters are not above accountability for factually incorrect, inaccurate reporting. Now, the FCC has always had the authority to review licenses, and supporters say that oversight mechanism, rather than direct censorship, keeps the process within an established regulatory structure with due process protections. Now, some media critics argue that the threat of scrutiny may push news organizations to apply more rigorous fact-checking standards, potentially raising the bar for what gets aired as fact versus opinion. Now, on the other side of things, The Supreme Court's unanimous 2024 ruling in NRA versus Volo explicitly held that government threats of legal sanctions to suppress disfavored speech are unconstitutional, meaning these FCC threats may already be on legally indefensible ground. Even if licenses are never actually revoked, the threat alone is enough to make reporters and editors self-censor, fundamentally altering newsroom decisions out of fear rather than journalistic judgment. No administration in modern history has moved to revoke a broadcast license over disagreement with news content. Doing so would transform the FCC from a technical regulator into a tool of political suppression.
Hello, this is Quentin, and I will be doing the social media aspect of our presentation. So first, I'll be talking about, or the first point is social media can be a double-edged sword when it comes to free speech. Basically meaning either people can use social media for good, or their First Amendment right, freedom of speech for good, or they use it for bad. Second point is on one side, it can be an amazing tool for bringing people together and expressing facts or opinions freely. Again, kind of with the first point, um, it kind of depends on how people use their freedom of speech. Some things may be not agreed upon with other people. Um, but you kind of just have to learn that freedom of speech kind of gives the what's the word it lets people discuss things that maybe other people won't agree with. And for the third point, on the other hand, people can abuse it. Social media can be used for many horrible things like hate speech or just bullying in general. It can also give people a platform who want to spread hate, even if it's their opinion. Again, freedom of speech, it can be used in many ways. Some things some people may not agree with, and some people may agree with. It's just there's a line between someone using it and expressing their opinion, and someone's opinion being hateful. Social media, or first I'll be talking about social media, the good part of it. Um, One, and I kind of highlighted a movement, the Me Too movement. Um, this movement spread awareness for women who face sexual harassment and sexual abuse. Um, this movement first blew up on Facebook in 2017, but eventually spread to other social medias like Instagram and Facebook. And then this movement has helped people who may not have a voice to speak up about issues going on with them. It also didn't It just didn't have to be about sexual harassment, although that is a very important issue, and it could be used for any issue regardless of the problem. I highlight this movement just mainly because this movement really obviously started on social media, and it was used for good. It was used for people who didn't have their voice heard. It kind of gave these people who didn't really speak up much, it gave them confidence to speak up about issues or their issues or just issues in general. So I think it's pretty important that the First Amendment is used, when it's used right, it's used for good. I feel like it should be used for good, but obviously it's not always used for good, or it can be used for good, but how certain people use it, or kind of blow it out of proportion, can make it a problem. And then for my second point, I'm talking about social media, and I'm talking about like the bad part of it. Um, Basically meaning how people have used free speech and twisted it for hate. Um, so my first point is, as we all know, First Amendment rights give you the freedom of speech. When people's opinions become hateful, where does that line draw? The graph that I have on the top right shows an instance of where people showed hate online towards many different groups of people, even if some of those instances were not the actual reasons as to why. I believe the specific, and I pointed to the source in the second point or the second bullet point. Um, the hate that was specifically targeted was over religious beliefs and ethnicity. Um, but as you can see on this graph, even if um, some of these categories weren't necessarily directed in this instance, the increase in hate speech for those groups increased, uh, which isn't good. And for my last point, instances like these is why some social media platforms need to have some reform. It's okay to have an opinion, but when instances of hate like this happens over and over again, it makes you wonder, why does it keep going on and how can it be fixed?
So my section's all about protests and the importance of protests. They're protected obviously in the First Amendment, and it's one of the best ways for people to get out and actually express themselves and their beliefs and their opinions. It's probably the most visible form, and it's very powerful form. Speeches and protests, especially. Obviously, the "I Have a Dream" speech, everyone knows. But there's also plenty of other uh, protests that are, come up with chants, stuff like the Black Lives Matter movement, stuff like that. Um, and I have a picture here of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, which was one of the most important times in the history of humanity, um, and especially in the First Amendment with protests. So there's protections under the First Amendment, um, so long as the protest is peaceful. You can hold signs, you can do chants, speeches, stuff like that, so long as they're not threatening, um, and talk really about anything you want. Um, we'll talk about sort of the things you can't do. Um, and then I have this case here, Edwards versus South Carolina in 1963, where the Supreme Court protected students who, peacefully protested at the state capitol. It was sort of the first demonstration from the Supreme Court of allowing people to, or students especially, to speak and their viewpoints. So it was very important in that sense. And then we'll get into the limits on protest because with any good thing, there's always going to be some drawbacks, and people can go too far. Obviously, at protests, we've seen and say things that go too far. So they can regulate the government, that is, can regulate, the time, the place, and the manner of a political protest. Um, you can't block pedestrian traffic and regulation of safety, stuff like that. Especially if you say something that they feel is threatening, they can come after the protests and shut it down based on that. So, um, it's important to keep protests peaceful. We hear it all the time, but it's very important. So that leads me into my example, which is the Columbia protests of 2024. You can see in that picture, bunch of students basically were camping out based on or because of the Gaza and or Palestine versus Israel war that is still going on today. They were protesting for Gaza, as you can see there, and eventually it was shut down because it is private property. The NYPD was stepped in and cleared out the encampment. A lot of people feel it infringed on the First Amendment rights, including speech, especially speech, because they were speaking out against Israel, which our government obviously sides with. So there's plenty of gray area there, but that's essentially a rundown of it. Um, it was a peaceful protest, but it was getting in the way of the college, and it is a private college, so they can step in without government. So if they feel it's not among their views, they can step in. A lot of people don't like that, so there's a lot of debate about it. whether it was suppression or it was just Columbia trying to get students to move on. It's pretty hotly debated, but just like anything else, there's two sides to every story, and freedom of speech could or maybe wasn't, could have been or maybe wasn't infringed upon here.
Politics can bring a whole new perspective on freedom of speech as politicians are the main people enforcing it. Even though they are a very slim majority of the population being responsible for enforcing something like freedom of speech can be tasks that some may not want to tackle but has to be done. Right.